Hi folks, this is Slim with Dive Pros with a quick overview of the scubapro Aladin 1 dive computer that you will use during your open water scuba class. As you can see on the image, the dive screen displays your current depth on the top left, dive time, which is the amount of time you've been underwater, in the top right in minutes, the no-stop time remaining in the center in minutes, the current temperature on the bottom left, and the current programmed oxygen percentage, which should remain at 21. Even if you're taking nitrox during your open water class, the shallow dives we do, there's no numerical advantage to using nitrox. So we'll leave it set at 21%. On the right hand side you can see the nitrogen absorption bar graph. There are 6 segments, and on this display it's showing 3 of them, which is still in the green zone. On the right hand side of the watch face, you can see the green, yellow, and red zones. Operating the computer is very simple. The series of button presses, there's 2 buttons, kidney shaped at the bottom left. You can see them in the display where the cursor is indicating. The manual shows taps, which is a half shaded button, and pressing and holding, which is a completely shaded button. And that's how you operate the 2 buttons to change between screens and to enter information. So to turn the unit on, you can press and hold either button, the left or the right. Pressing and holding the left button will cause all of the segments to display to light up, a lot like a car will when you first start it on the dashboard. If you press and hold the right button, it simply goes to the time of day display. So here on the left side you can see that all the segments lit up temporarily. It says for 5 seconds. And then after it will shift to the time of day display, which is shown here. The manufacturer of this particular computer is from Switzerland, so all the examples are in Celsius and meters. But we have the units at the dive shop set to Fahrenheit and feet, so don't worry. At any rate, after the time of display is displayed, if you don't have any more inputs after 3 minutes, it'll turn off the display. If you press and hold the right button, you'll cycle through the date and then next the battery conditioning. You're going to need at least 3 of the top bars for the battery. If the battery is lower than it, you'll get a battery warning and we'll replace the battery. So verify that your computer that you're using for the class has enough battery to take us through. They check them on a regular basis at the dive shop, so it shouldn't be a problem for anyone. The computer also has a backlight. We won't be doing any diving after dark, but if you're in an area or you just need more light, pressing and holding the left button will activate the backlight temporarily. During a dive, you'll see the current depth, as mentioned earlier, in the top left. This example happens to be in meters. The current amount of time underwater, which will increase the dive time in the top right. Again, the no stop or nitrogen time remaining. This starts at a high number and counts down based on any previous dives or any previous absorbed nitrogen you had in your body. Typically on our dives, it'll start out at 99 minutes, and unless we get some repetitive deeper dives, you may not count down at all, because you have to absorb enough nitrogen to make it count it off. In this example, it's showing the diver has 24 minutes of bottom time remaining before they need to be at the surface. On the bottom left, you'll either see the current temperature or the maximum depth, and you can cycle this by pressing the right hand or left hand buttons. On the lower right, you're going to see the current oxygen exposure. This is important for folks who are taking nitrox and will be covered during that course. While you're diving, the 2 colons after the dive time and no stop time will blink. That shows you that the computer is running and it's actively calculating your nitrogen and oxygen exposures. This screen is displaying the temperature and the oxygen mix. Again, these can be cycled during the dive by activating the buttons. Over here on the right, we see the display when the computer is in dive mode, but the depth is less than 3 feet. The 3 dashes indicate that you're in surface mode, but the computer is still actively ready to continue your dive. So both the depth and the nitrogen time remaining are dashed out. If you're at the surface and you're in between dives and you're trying to do dive planning or access the logbook function, and you see this display, this means that the water contacts are still wet and need to be dried off before you can change any of the modes. To do that, you can use a towel to dry off the water contacts between the buttons, or you can use the tank air, which will help blow out any water that might remain. So another different display showing cycling between the temperature and max depth and the programmed oxygen in the tank versus the current oxygen exposure. Over on the right we have the nitrogen loading bar graph, and as shown in the first slide, there was a color code that corresponded to increasing exposure. In this example, this diver was at 18.7 meters for 50, and he's been underwater 57 minutes and has 24 minutes of no stop time remaining. On the way back up from a dive, the dive computer calculates the maximum safe rate of ascent. In the online training, it's mentioned that 1 foot per second is the maximum rate. In reality, lower and slower than that is safer, and most computer manufacturers have indeed a lower rate of ascent. The online training mentions that you should either use 1 foot a second or the rate indicated by your dive computer, so that's what we'll follow. In this example, this diver is ascending 10% faster than they should, indicated by the 110% and the slow arrow. These icons above the display indicate a beep pattern. So there's an audible pattern and a visual indicator that the diver is ascending too rapidly. The indicators change and the audible pattern change based on the amount of speed you're exceeding the recommended rate by, up to 180% of the maximum rate. You can see that the beeping gets louder and longer, the audible alarm. The actual rate that the computer is programmed to is down here in this table. Depth in feet across in the third row, and speed in feet per minute across the bottom row. So the 1 foot per second, as recommended by Patty, basically applies only in the shallowest depth. When you're deeper, because of the physics of water, it is safe to ascend at a slightly faster rate. And indeed, that's what drives the algorithm for the ascent rate warning in the computer system. Further on the nitrogen loading bar graph, you can see that there are 6 segments. Segments 1 through 3, you're in the green zone. You're safely within the no stop time range. When you've gotten segments 4 and 5 lit, you're approaching the required decompression. All of the diving we do in this class is no decompression diving. And indeed, if you enter decompression as a recreational diver, you should consider that an emergency situation and follow the decompression instructions on your computer. If you get into the red with this particular model, you'll have a mandatory decompression, and you should observe that before you reach the surface, provided you have enough air or breathing gas in your tank. A decompression indication would look something like this with the scubapro Aladin 1. On the left side, you've got a deco stop icon. Next to it, you've got the amount of time to do the decompression for in minutes. So in this example, 7 minutes. The depth you should do the deco at, which in this example is 3 meters. And then the total time to reach the surface, including the decompression stops, 11 minutes. If the computer tells you to do a decompression stop and you have enough breathing gas, do the decompression stop. That will reduce your risk for decompression illness. On most normal dives, everywhere you go in the world, people will ask you to do a safety stop. All of recreational diving is performed in such a manner that you can make a slow, safe ascent to the surface at any time without making any stops. So the safety stop even though it is doing some slight decompression, isn't required. But most places will ask you to do it simply to add safety. To activate the safety stop timer in the scubapro Aladin 1, you tap the left button at a depth shallower than 21 feet, and it will count off 3 minutes right in the center of the display here. And you'll see the stop indicator. You can repeat that timer as many times as you'd like by tapping the left button. We will try to use this if we do any diving deeper than about 20 feet during our checkout dives. Again, at the surface, the depth and the nitrogen time remaining are replaced with dashes. The display will stay activated for about 5 minutes, and then it will turn the screen off, even though it's still calculating any remaining nitrogen in your body and doing its outgassing algorithms. On the time of day display, if you have residual nitrogen from a previous dive, you will see several changes. On the left side, you see the altitude range warning. Further, in other pages of the manual, it will explain to you what this means, but basically it's saying, do not ascend above altitude range number 4. And the altitudes that those ranges correspond to are listed in the table in the manual. You'll also see the no-fly icon. It's telling you not to get in an aircraft and go to altitude for a period of 21 hours, right here just next to the icon. If you did omit a decompression stop during a dive, you'll see the no dive warning indicator. This means you should not attempt another dive. In the center, you'll still see the time of day, bottom left temperature, bottom right programmed oxygen percentage. You'll also see the bar graph indicating that you have remaining nitrogen in your body, and over time that will slowly be reduced. If you'd like to see how many hours before you've gotten rid of all the nitrogen in your body, you can press and hold the right button, and it will show you your remaining time until full desaturation, or riddance of the excess nitrogen, in hours and minutes. This example being 22 hours and 30 minutes. Also, you'll see on this same screen the residual nitrogen bar. Folks diving nitrox will also see the central nervous system oxygen exposure level. Obviously, you'd want this to be less than 100%. If you cycle the computer over to the plan mode by tapping the right or left buttons from the time of day screen, you will enter the, it will say PLN on the screen, and you press and hold the right button. Once you've done that, it'll take you to this screen if you have a previous dive, or this screen if you do not. If you see this, it's indicating to you you shouldn't be doing any ascents above altitude range as indicated. And it will ask you, what is the time interval before you plan to get back in the water? You enter the time interval in hours and minutes by tapping the right or left buttons. If you plan to get in the water immediately, leave the interval at 0. This added interval time, surface interval, will affect the plan mode calculations because it will account for any nitrogen that you outgas at the surface. Press and hold the right button, or if you're already on this screen, you'll see the add depth screen. In the bottom left, you'll see the depth you're telling the computer to plan your next dive to. And I believe it increments in 10 feet increments, and I'm not sure what it would do in meters. Tap the left or right buttons to change the depth, and it will display the corresponding maximum no stop time with respect to the amount of nitrogen in your body. This time changes based on any previous dives, temperature, any programmed oxygen percentages in the breathing gas, and will be displayed here in the center on the right. So to plan the dive, set the depth you intend to go to, maximum depth, and it will show you how many minutes you're going to have available to safely dive. So a diver would use this if they wanted to do a second or third dive, for example, or a first dive, for a given amount of time. You need to make sure that you have enough nitrogen time remaining, or no stop or no deco time. All different terminology for the same thing. The amount of time you can safely dive for before you need to exit the water. To exit plan mode, press and hold both buttons. Tapping the left button or the right button to cycle the menus will take you to the log menu. Press and hold the right button to enter the log screen. If you have a previous dive, you will also see the words interval and a time. This is showing you how long since you were in the water. You won't see this if you don't have any previous dives. In this example, it's showing the diver span of the water for 24 minutes. Press and hold the right button to enter the logbook. Page 1 of the logbook will display the maximum depth reached in the top left, the maximum amount of time underwater in the top right in minutes, the date that the dive occurred on, the dive sequence number. So this is a reverse chronological order. It shows the most recent dive first. The oxygen percentage that was programmed for that dive, and the battery's level during the dive. Press and hold the right button to go to page 2 of this particular dive. If there's any additional information on page 2, it will show you altitude range and any warnings that were indicated during the dive. Tapping the buttons will cycle between the dives in reverse chronological order. We will review plan and logbook functions after each dive. Planning before the dives, logbook after the dives, or after the end of the last dive day to record all the depths and times into your logbooks, and or after each dive if you so choose to review them. I hope that review was helpful. It was very brief. The manual itself is available via a download from the course information document I sent out to everyone. Looking forward to diving with you all. Thanks for your attention.